On October 15th, 2019, Margaret Chin sat in her Honda Civic outside the Riverside County Municipal Building, hands trembling as she clutched a manila envelope containing 3 years' worth of meticulously documented evidence. Inside those walls worked the man who had stolen her retirement, her dignity, and nearly her will to live. Margaret Chin had spent 42 years as a high school mathematics teacher in Riverside, California. At 64, she was looking forward to a comfortable retirement funded by her pension and the modest house she'd finally paid off in 2018. Her husband David had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer, leaving her alone but financially stable. She lived quietly, tended to her garden, and volunteered at the local library on weekends. Margaret was exactly the kind of person who followed rules, trusted institutions, and believed that hard work would be rewarded with security in her golden years. She had never been arrested, never even received a speeding ticket. Her biggest vice was feeding the stray cats that wandered through her neighborhood. When she received the official letter from Riverside County in March 2019, informing her that she needed to update her property tax assessment for a potential reduction, she didn't hesitate to call the number provided. The man who answered Margaret's call was Robert Valdez, a 20-year veteran of the Riverside County Assessor's Office. Valdez held the title of Senior Property Assessment Specialist, a position that gave him access to sensitive financial information about thousands of homeowners. Over the phone, his voice was warm and professional. He explained that due to recent changes in California property tax law, many longtime residents were eligible for significant reductions in their assessments. All Margaret needed to do was provide some basic information and pay a small administrative fee to expedite the process. What Margaret didn't know was that Robert Valdez had been running this scam for over 3 years, targeting elderly homeowners throughout Riverside County. Valdez would obtain their names and property information through his legitimate job, then contact them claiming they were eligible for tax reductions, credits, or exemptions that didn't actually exist. He had perfected a system of fake paperwork, fraudulent processing fees, and elaborate follow-up calls that made his victims believe they were working with legitimate county services. Valdez had stolen over $400,000 from 37 victims, most of them retired teachers, nurses, and blue-collar workers who had saved their entire lives from modest homes they could call their own. Over the course of 18 months, Valdez systematically drained Margaret's savings account through an intricate series of fraudulent fees and charges. It began with a $300 administrative fee to process her property tax reduction application. 2 weeks later, Valdez called to explain that additional documentation was required, along with a $500 expedite fee to prevent delays. Margaret paid. A month after that, Valdez informed her that the county had discovered an error in her original property assessment from 2015, and she owed back taxes of $1,200, but the payment would ultimately save her thousands. Margaret paid. Each interaction followed the same pattern. Valdez would call with urgent-sounding updates, always with official-sounding language and references to California tax codes that Margaret couldn't verify without spending hours researching complex legal documents. He created fake reference numbers, cited non-existent deadlines, and even provided a direct phone number that actually reached his personal cell phone, which he would answer as Riverside County Assessment Services. Between March 2019 and September 2019, Margaret paid Valdez 17 separate fees, totaling $23,000. When her savings account was nearly empty, Valdez convinced her to take a home equity loan, explaining that the final property tax adjustment would be processed within 60 days and she would receive a refund check for over $30,000. Margaret borrowed $18,000 against her house and gave it all to Valdez. #the_crime #. Margaret's first moment of doubt came in late September when she called the main Riverside County office to inquire about the status of her refund. The clerk had no record of any property tax reduction application under her name or reference number. When Margaret mentioned Robert Valdez, the clerk confirmed he was a county employee but said he worked in commercial property assessment, not residential tax reductions. Margaret's world began to collapse. She spent the next 3 weeks calling different county departments, speaking with supervisors, and trying to understand how she had been fooled so completely. Every conversation confirmed her worst fears. There was no property tax reduction program. There were no administrative fees required for assessment updates. Robert Valdez had stolen her money. Margaret's case might have remained an isolated incident if not for the determination of Detective Sarah Molina of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department Economic Crimes Unit. When Margaret filed her initial report, Detective Molina noticed similarities to two other cases she had worked that year involving elderly victims and fraudulent property tax schemes. Molina began cross-referencing the complaint details and discovered that all three victims had been contacted by someone claiming to work for the county assessor's office. More importantly, all three had been told to make payments to the same business account at Wells Fargo. Detective Molina obtained a subpoena for the bank records and discovered that the account was registered to RC Assessment Services, a business entity that had never been licensed in California. The account had received deposits from dozens of individuals over the past 3 years, totaling over $400,000. Molina spent weeks calling every person who had made deposits to that account. One by one, she uncovered a pattern of elderly homeowners who had been convinced to pay various fees related to property tax adjustments, exemptions, or reductions that never materialized. The investigation revealed that Valdez had been using his position at the county to identify potential targets, focusing on elderly residents who owned their homes outright and had significant equity. He would research their property history, then contact them with personalized information that made his scam seem legitimate and official. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Molina discovered that Valdez had been sloppy with his digital trail. The phone number he provided to victims was registered under his real name, and his personal cell phone records showed hundreds of calls to his victims during county work hours. More damaging was the fact that Valdez had been accessing the county's property database to research his targets, leaving electronic logs that proved he had been using his official position to facilitate the fraud. Molina worked with the county's IT department to trace every database search Valdez had conducted over the previous 3 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Valdez would search for properties owned by elderly residents. Then within days or weeks, those same property owners would receive calls about fictitious tax reduction opportunities. When Detective Molina finally arrested Valdez at his county office on November 3, 2019, she found a notebook in his desk drawer containing the names, phone numbers, and property details of over 60 potential victims. Some names were crossed out with notes like paid or complete. Others had question marks, indicating Valdez was still planning to contact them. In Valdez's home office, investigators discovered a sophisticated operation complete with fake county letterhead, a separate computer for managing victim communications, and detailed spreadsheets tracking how much money he had collected from each target. Perhaps most chilling was a handwritten list titled Best Prospects, which ranked potential victims based on their property values and estimated net worth. #investigation, #. The trial of Robert Valdez began on August 12, 2020, in Riverside County Superior Court. Prosecutor Amanda Torres presented a methodical case that detailed each fraudulent transaction and showed how Valdez had abused his position of public trust. Margaret Chin testified for over 2 hours, describing how Valdez had used official-sounding language and his legitimate county employment to earn her confidence. Her testimony was devastating. She explained how she had trusted Valdez because he worked for the government, how she had verified his employment by calling the county directly, and how his intimate knowledge of her property records had convinced her that his calls were legitimate. The defense attorney argued that Valdez's actions were the result of gambling addiction and financial desperation, not malicious intent. He claimed Valdez had genuinely believed he could repay the money before anyone noticed. This argument collapsed when Prosecutor Torres presented evidence of Valdez's detailed victim tracking system and his systematic approach to identifying targets. The jury also heard testimony from Detective Molina, who explained how Valdez had used his county database access to research victims and had created an elaborate fake business identity to hide his crimes. On September 4, 2020, the jury found Robert Valdez guilty on 37 counts of elder abuse, fraud, and theft. He was sentenced to 12 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to his victims. The judge noted that Valdez had not only stolen money, but had shattered his victims' trust in government institutions and their confidence in their own judgment. Margaret Chun recovered approximately 60% of her stolen money through restitution and a victim compensation fund established by Riverside County. While she never fully recouped her losses, She expressed satisfaction that Valdez would face consequences for his actions. The case prompted Riverside County to implement new safeguards for employees who access sensitive taxpayer information, including regular audits of database searches and mandatory ethics training. Valdez is currently serving his sentence at California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. His earliest possible parole date is 2027. Margaret Chin's case reminds us that fraud thrives on the trust we place in institutions and the people who represent them. Sometimes justice comes not from dramatic confrontations, but from methodical investigation and the courage of victims who refuse to remain silent. Don't forget to hit subscribe.